We back reading the American Book of the Dead, and we are starting on the chapter titled Introduction to the Macrodimensions of the Labyrinth. And it reads as follows. The sheer ordinariness of an unprepared experience of the macrodimensional domains of the labyrinth deceives us into complacent acceptance of events. The unsuspecting voyager is unaware of any transition, but macro-dimensional sophisticates have trained themselves through visualization to view all dimensions of the labyrinth, including the human dimension, in a supernormal way. Without continuous, well-reinforced visualization training, the labyrinth macro-dimensions tend to masquerade as ordinary life. Guides appear, but we explain them to ourselves as simple changes of light, playing tricks on the vision. The sweeping tonal harmonics of the macro-dimensional sounds we translate to common understandable phenomena. Horns of passing traffic, airplanes, music. The mind transforms labyrinth phenomena into ordinary phenomena of the present consciousness. Remember that the nature of the phenomenal world, the lower dimensions, is phenomena. All the phenomena of the organic world, the human dimension, as well as the labyrinth with its macro dimensions, are controlled by the being attention, because higher minds controls itself, unlike lower mind, which is controlled by the environment. But unfortunately, the awareness of an individual generally doesn't include awareness of or control over the mind. What is called the mind in ordinary intercultural translations of higher ideas is simply the result of the activities of the primary attention of the being, the cosmic nature of which is voidness, which is called in this treatise the essential self, that which is one's own, the deepest self existing only temporarily dependently upon the biological self. One of the primary problems with the untrained individual who has not included within himself first-hand knowledge of the subtle feelings and sensations of the macro-dimensional domains of the labyrinth, which during the lifetime are hidden under the dominant organic feelings, perceptions, and sensations of organic life, is to actually notice the unusual non-organic nature of the macro-dimensional environments without dropping into blackout, waking up only after it's all over. A normal human primate, given the usual education and routinized life experience, just doesn't have the slightest idea of what's going on, where he is, what's happening around him, his feelings and senses, his sensations, the events proceeding all around him, not even 1/1,000,000th of it. We can't expect to notice anything as different in the macro dimensions of the labyrinth when the only difference is the quality of the experience and not the imagery. This reminds me of lucid dreaming. Everything that I just read reminds me of lucid dreaming. That's why we need to train ourselves to feel, sense, and be aware of ourselves and our environment. Not to enhance our sex lives or personality, but to be sensitive to change on a much deeper level than the organic mind and its primate level senses values. It is also a good idea to establish a new imagery for our voyage in the labyrinth. We can't depend upon a sudden increase in our sensitivity to small and subtle series of changes in the environment. It probably won't happen. It isn't necessary to understand the readings. If understanding comes, that's fine. But the reading will reach the part of the person that's actually going into the macro-dimensional domains of the labyrinth, and in that state, understanding comes naturally. Read this at every opportunity. and where it is disallowed or outlawed as religious trash by fanatics of primate and other forms of organic existence who would like to murder every being and thus trap all beings in the organic human sector, then learn this method by heart and pass it on verbatim on an oral initiatory basis. Cultivation of the fine art of dying requires great inner discipline, and for a population that doesn't even know about the macro dimensions, it's almost impossible to introduce. In a culture which has in a culture which has a taboo against knowing about death, even on an ordinary organic level, it's going to take some doing. Something very little known in the East and definitely unknown in the West is that the voyage in the labyrinth continues all the time. The labyrinth underlines the organic world. The vibrations of the macro dimensions of the labyrinth are dominated by the organic vibrations, which are heavier and easier to sense through biological machine and human awareness than the direct but subtle perceptions of the dimensional domains. Another fact is that you can enter and leave the macro dimensions of the labyrinth at any time for a period of seconds, minutes, hours, or years up to eternities and experience rebirth, not necessarily in an infant biological machine. You can be reborn at any time into any size, shape, and age biological machine. Your subjective experience, unless you have had training in feeling and senses, is as if nothing unusual had happened. This remind me, and I'm apologizing for these tangents early on, but this remind me of it's definitely been certain seasons in this experience where it'll damn near be like, I obviously, of course, don't look different to the naked eye. Anybody that's staring at me and perceiving me, they would be able to truly notice that I look different. But it's definitely been a handful of seasons where I will look in the mirror, and although I'm still in what this book is calling
The time is 10 p.m.
The time is 10 p.m. But although I'm still in what this book is calling the biological or organic machine, it's still the same machine, but I can see clear as day that this is a different face. Not a literal different face, of course, but it's almost as if some sort of rebirth has taken place, and I can see it. Very interesting. But it says, I'm gonna reread that. You can be reborn at any time into any size, shape, and age biological machine. Your subjective experience, unless you have had training in feeling and sensing, is as if nothing unusual had happened. All the experiences in the macro-dimensional domains of the labyrinth tend to go unnoticed, and you may take subtle rebirth without knowledge or control. However, once in a biological machine, you insist that those are your memories and your interests, and that you have always had that biological machine. After all, if you have been in the macro dimensions or macro dimensional domains of the labyrinth and then have been reborn into the present dimension, you know it, wouldn't you? The ordinary individual changes habitation in each of the 6 lower tertiary dimensions without realizing it, anywhere from 4 to 5 times to hundreds of times every few days. But try explaining that to someone who couldn't tell you what's been going on for the last minute and a half. Warning: do not reach out trying to help those who don't want help. Help by quietly reading the labyrinth instructions out of earshot and out of sight. If they catch you helping them, they'll tar and feather you and run you out of town on a rail. That's a wooden post used for ruined fencing, not the steel kind used for locomotives. If you haven't had any training in the feeling and sensing exercises, and you are in doubt about whether you're in the macro dimensions of the labyrinth or not, here are some suspicious places to look. The chances are very good that you are in the macro dimensional domains of the labyrinth, if you suddenly find yourself. Excuse me, I have to blow my nose. The chances are very good that you are in the macro-dimensional domains of the labyrinth if you suddenly find yourself in a bus or a train or plane or any other form of public transportation, compulsively walking from room to room in a house or apartment, and you can't seem to stop moving or reduce the restlessness and agitation, yet you're not actually in an anxiety state. In a small chamber with someone whose faces keep changing suddenly as if the light is playing upon it. Along for long periods of time in an older hotel room or motel room, continuously going back and forth into the bathroom or kitchen, waking up suddenly from a nightmare or a dream about yourself having had different biological machines, not necessarily of the earth varieties, driving in a car for a long period of time, watching a clock that moves impossibly slowly, in an older theater with balconies and basement, watching a film that seems familiar to you but you can't remember having seen before. Usually the film will have an unusual amount of senseless violence or seem very religious or both. Getting a phone call in the middle of the night, especially from someone you know is dead. Apparently attending a funeral for someone else. Even more suspicious when the deceased is conspicuously unidentified and perhaps unidentifiable. Lost in a small but unaccountably complex town or a very large, accountably complex city. Finding oneself playing with cars with pictures on them, arranging the cars in varying order. The mood is exalted as such combination yields a new set of all-encompassing cognitions. Unfortunately, the cognitions, albeit vast and grand, don't actually refer to anything. Inside a tunnel, ascending or descending an escalator which seems to get smaller and smaller, eventually requiring a squeeze through head first naturally. In an elevator alone, very alone, and the elevator seems to be going sideways. In front of a television set, seated in a cane, wicker, or rocking chair, generally of oak, with side armrests, unable to receive anything other than soap operas and news. Traveling a tube while surfing, sitting alone in a room for a long time, awakening after an unusually long sleep, a full day at least. At the disco, dancing to a light show in heavy metal or rock music. The word rock has a very interesting meaning, dealing with an area of basic creation before the present cosmos were constructed. Heavy metal, in the chemical sense, is a very interesting set of elements with a rapid half-life that's over before it begins. Sitting or standing in total darkness for an indeterminate but quite obviously long period of time. Standing in front of a mirror for an unusually long time. In a city which, although large, appears to be abandoned or unpopulated. Having strange, full-blown, dimensional, totally tactile, hallucinatory experiences of another life in another world. Dreaming you had died or almost died. This is something that definitely happened to me consistently. Seeing people whom you had thought were long dead on the street or in restaurants. Sitting in a cage area or in what appears to be playpens for children. You will see red, blue, green, white, and yellow lights just out of touching range. Talking with mysterious strangers who stop you on the street or in a public space and begin speaking as if they know you and you know somehow that they do. Feeling very tired and run down, although there is no apparent reason for it. Feeling apprehension and intense agitation as though something terrible is about to happen. A feeling of dread. Getting a new car or new clothes or moving to another house or town for no apparent reason. Getting divorced or married or changing partners. Changing friends or neighbors. Listening to loud music with a lot of rumbling bass sounds in it or high-pitched tones which hurt your ears. visiting a recording studio or broadcast station, leaving one country, going to another, or going from state to state. There are many more, the particulars of which can be assessed in training programs available to those learning to be professional Labyrinth readers. One of the first problems in dealing with the between lives area is realizing that it's not really between lives or reincarnation, but the same life lived through creation, skipping like a flat stone on water into the voidness of non-creation. But the change in state doesn't change the life you're living and ought not to affect your consciousness unless your consciousness is dependent upon your actions in samsara, the world of illusionary influences and centralized ego reality. When you first came into the cosmos, your idea, principality was, or at any rate your hope is now, to maintain the thread of consciousness throughout your experience in the universe. Usually it works out that what with all the fascination and suddenly experiences and emotional sensory shocks, the symphony with the focus of attention of the biological machine and constant demands of your attentions, before you realize that you're being quietly dragged into a tar baby, little by little, there you are, nodding ironically, muttering something in the general direction of, you got me again. Excuse me, one moment. I have to blow my nose once again. Sorry about that. I'm actually gonna change my air filter after this. I'm gonna reread that. He said, when you first came into the cosmos, your idea, principality was, or at any rate your hope is now, to maintain the thread of consciousness throughout your experience in the universe. Usually it works out that with all the fascination and sudden experiences and emotional sensory shocks, in symphony with the focus of attention of the biological machine and constant demands on your attention, before you realize you're quietly being dragged into a tar baby. We could dwell upon it, recalling in vivid graphic detail how you got caught in biological games, but basically it boils down to the fact that you intended to liberate yourself and the universe is going to do its damnness to stop you. And if you can't bring you to a complete stop, then it's at least going to slow you down for a while. The universe becomes like a grasping mother, a Chinese finger trap. For every ounce of intention you have getting yourself liberated, there's 1 trillion ton of counter intention stacked up against you. So what are your actual chances of liberating? Just how effective is this Book of the Dead anyway? If you're looking for a teaching, it's because you've lost the thread of consciousness. One who hasn't lost the thread doesn't need a teaching. You know the whole story, and you know what you have to do about it. This leaves an interesting opening. Of course, the most confused idiot will now exclaim, well, I haven't lost my thread of consciousness. Who the hell needs a teaching? I'm just flipping through the book to see if this jerk's got anything straight. That's all. Well, listen. This jerk has been through the labyrinth more times than a cat howls in heat. And if there's something stupid you can do, either in a higher or lower dimension in the labyrinth, why, I've done it, sometimes more than twice. There are several fundamental problems in the labyrinth. One of them is the simplest to spot and the hardest to deal with. You got so caught up in the pursuit of primate life that you're no longer interested in your prime aim as a voyager. The aim you had when you came into this cosmic theater in the first place. And now you're interested in how it all comes out and in doing something about it by changing the experience. You're so interested in all of that that you haven't got the time or interest to waste all this ethereal and then practical spiritual stuff. All right, no one can force you to practice the teachings. Maybe this time all you want to do is refamiliarize yourself with them, not actually put them to use. So you read, you study, you go to a few lectures, maybe do a little yoga, jogging, and racquetball. And if you want to go further out with it, you could change your diet, wear looser clothes, non-leather sandals, and take up trans-dimensional tennis. That's the first major problem with the macro-dimensional domains. No practical experience during the lifetime. The middle of the voyage in the macro dimensions is one hell of a time to get your first practical experience with the teaching. Let's say you have been practicing. Then what are you doing with the paperback version of this book? Well, first of all, it's absolutely necessary to rid oneself of the pride peculiar to human primates. That conviction that we need none of this stuff because we're already there. This is just the sort of arrogant nonsense that's going to guarantee that we get knocked off in the first stages of the in-between life section of the labyrinth. Imagine someone saying to the clear light, well, as it happens, I was just a Sufi before I woke up dead. That puts a nice meat barrier between you and the gentle blending with the absolute, doesn't it? The prime aim when confronted with the absolute is to realize that you are the shining void without losing yourself. I say without losing yourself to ease the Western mind, but how can you lose what can't be lost? You may lose or consider loss many things during that merging process, but never the essential self. The essential self may have been hidden under a tremendous load of primate conditioning, but when the biological self has been stripped off, you will see that what's real about you was never lost. Hidden under a mound of insufferable egocentricity, perhaps, but never actually lost. As if lost, yes, maybe all trace of the deep self was absent every minute of your life on earth, but now, finally, you can be you, such as it may be. The clear light and the essential self are one and the same, so there really isn't any merging action you can take since there is nothing which to merge. But you might continue to identify with the primate self and feel alienated from the absolute. The essential self has no qualities. That's how you can recognize it. One quality of the void is that it lacks any center of gravity or centrality. It isn't everywhere and it isn't anywhere, but it is where it is. Now, how can anyone possibly merge with an object of anger, fear, or jealousy? And what if the absolute takes the form, a form you impose upon it in your never-ending struggle against the unfamiliar, or someone or something you don't happen to like, or are fighting, or is threatening you, or that you hate, or that confuses you? In other words, you had better conquer those tendencies before you attempt to merge, right? What causes all these reactions towards the blob? The real world, which has become separated from the essential self by unconsciousness and considerations of differentiation. Let's look at them one at a time, although we could lump them all together and say that these are just symptoms of your own conspiracy against yourself in that endless cosmic game called Keep It Going. We're going to have to get one more item before we can discuss this situation, because we may not be talking the same language. In the text, we talk about demonic apparitions and so forth. We had better begin by defining the macro-dimensional domains of the labyrinth as they are experienced between lives. It's easier without a body to see the unwinding or running down of consciousness accumulated in our most recent contact with the organic world, and to observe it breaking apart into the primary components of life, the universe, and everything. If the voyage happens according to form, and why wouldn't it? Then you'll have a very familiar and eternally recurring experience. Everything will look just the same as it has been looking. Well, maybe a tiny bit more plastic and prototypey, very real and very ancient and very fresh, as if made just now, with an air of unchanging oldness. But if you aren't paying very close attention, everything seems the same. Of course, you're not experiencing anything different than you were during the lifetime, but you're experiencing it in a different way. That's the main difference between life and death. One of the problems of voyaging in the macro dimensions of the labyrinth between lives is familiarity and the apparent ordinariness of the situation. You'll look straight at the old man and mom and talk with them about usual things. The old man and mom are going to be doing some peculiar things if you've projected familiar folks onto cosmic folks, which incidentally is the basis of organic planetary existence. Since you are the essential self, it's assumed by the guides that everything you're allowing yourself to experience, however discomforting and even excruciating, is all right, because they know very well that you, the essential self, are absolutely indestructible. As a voyager who is senior to any experience of reality, they rightly conclude that you have all the time there. Excuse me. As a voyager who is senior to any experience of reality, they rightly conclude that you have all the time there. That you have all the time there is to work out any little discomfort you might currently be freaking out about. Now we can dwell a bit on some reactions you might have towards your cosmic family in the labyrinth. Your brother can't seem to understand what's going on with you. Your mother doesn't relate to all your problems. They both trust in your eventual release from what's bothering you, but you're seeing eternity and you don't think that you'll ever work it out. You feel betrayed. You were just getting used to having a biological machine and being surrounded by all that nice, warm, planetary atmosphere. And now here you are, stripped bare and exposed. Not just your biological machine, but everything you are or ever were is exposed. They know about you, everything about you, because there isn't anything that isn't you. It's all clear now. You're lying, you're cheating, betrayals. You can't maintain your lies in the face of this awful nakedness. You're cold, confused, and alone. No matter what you do, where you go, you keep coming back to the same eternal space, because this space isn't where you are. It's who you are. There doesn't seem to be any escape, and there can't be an escape from yourself. No matter where you go, there you are. You're shivering and shaking. Boy, do you know what's going on? And you know what's going to happen. Absolutely nothing. Nothing in the absolute. So you become afraid or realize that you're afraid. Oh, there are some moments when it's almost all right, but never as soothing as time, space, bodies, and relationships. You ought not to expect to be able to merge with something that you're afraid of. And in this case, it's the ultimate boogeyman. You. How can you run from that? Oh, you found the way to run from it. And what do you call it? The world. Jealousy. There's a beauty. Why is this such a basic problem? Again, you're looking at these forces from within your essential self as personalities from whom you've been familiar or who have been associated with your experience of the labyrinth. In other words, you may have developed some prototype people with whom you always experience in the labyrinth. The inhabitants of your labyrinth, the pictures through which you see your experience of the macro-dimensional domains of the labyrinth experience in between lives. Now he is in here with her, or she is in here with him, or however you get that one going in your considerations. At any rate in the text, you'll notice that the fellow who comes to your rescue is always in her embrace, and he or she belongs to you. Why do you have to share her with him, or him with her? You know that one moment in the labyrinth is at least one lifetime, and that they can spend with each other, all the while leaving you alone, frustrated, and scared and lonely. and all you want is to be held and comforted. So jealousy pops up towards that which you wish to become one. In other words, to become jealous towards two aspects of yourself. This comes up a lot. This particular confirmation with a couple in union, and you might as well get used to it. This is incredibly one of the reasons for the taboo in the human sector against seeing another couple in union. Feeling threatened? This is another major problem in the macro-dimensional domains of the labyrinth. In the macro dimensions, your accumulated inclinations and tendencies, as well as attachments, being out of phase electromagnetically speaking with the general field, causing a localized field effect anomaly, and all those are picked up and vaporized by the cleansing radiations, one by one, in much the same way that one by one, in much the same way that irradiation reduces bacteria in supermarket vegetables. That leaves you without any automatic habitual functions or thought forms to keep you going. You've lost all of your automatics. And now you have the option of mechanically running on, making each movement happen, pushing into the future, letting go of the present, which is to say, you find yourself faced with the necessity of creating the future moment by moment and event by event. If you're to have any time flow at all, and that's a hell of a lot of work. So in the macro dimensions, if you're depending on the automatic time flow, you're going to feel threatened by the state. If you are dependent on an automatic time flow, you're going to feel threatened by a static, eternalized state. And you're likely going to get pretty exhausted by having to manually move the hands of clock to create the effect of a passage of time. If you expect to be a survivor in the macro-dimensional domains of the labyrinth, not escape is not the object. You'll have to practice being and functioning in the macro dimensions. Getting used to all those lights, sounds, and radiations, and you'll have to work on your tendencies towards anger, jealousy, hatred, violence, unconscious reaction, and particularly exhaustion and fear. Then there are your personal relationships, learning to let go of all human feelings of ownerships without destroying the relationships you are maintaining in the human dimension, gaining the ability to have relationships without attachment, but with honor and integrity. Finally, you may have a hard time finding out that you are in the macro dimensions until you wake up suddenly in shock, only to realize that you have been in the macro dimensions. But through inattention and exhaustion, you have involuntarily taken rebirth in your customary human primate form, or whatever you're currently enjoying, perhaps a bookworm. One way you may solve this perennial dilemma is to identify with the labyrinth guide. Don't trust your senses. Everyone, anyone, everything and anything could be the guide. The gorilla in your dreams, the Lord of Death. Try merging with anything you come across. That telephone over there, could that be the guide? Or the TV set? Is that it? The guide may, through your tendency to convert images to the ordinary and familiar, take many forms and has the specific function of causing and continuing the process of liberation and awakening through a series of miracles or coincidence control. This coincidence control is also called the grace of the guide and includes all coincidences, like them or not, appreciated or not, in or out of awareness. Any other function or attribute of the guide is strictly imaginary. To initiate and run the process of liberation, however, one must specifically ask. You might now see the sense of treating everyone and everything as a manifestation of God. As the mystics have said for centuries, including your own essential self, that selfness which resides deeply beyond the ego, consciousness, and action none of which are actually yours or ever were yours in the sense of ownership, but belong entirely to the world. You, the real you, exists solely as a source of attention and presence beyond all action and involvement with the turbulent flow of biological life. Biological life itself, just a secondary manifestation of localized field effect, probability, and indeterminacy all around you. That is a crazy statement. The sure way to recognize the macro dimensions of the labyrinth is to assume that you are always in them at any moment, at this very moment. This conversation, which you seem to be perceiving as a message in some sort of written form, a book, it's obvious that you've converted my presence to a safer, more familiar perceptual and experimental symbology, always acting as if in the macro dimensions of the labyrinth, assuming that your senses are deceiving you will give you the necessary edge to achieve your liberation from the human biological framework of reality perception. Your experience of the macro dimensions can be altered by the power habit to be human, think as a human, perceive as a human, and most unfortunately, at least in a macro dimensional sense, to react as a human, making the most extraordinary events and object appear as if a normal human experience. The reality of the macro dimensional state depends upon how much attention you can bring to bear on the actual present. If you've learned to function minimally, as have most human primates, with a sort of dim permanent inattention punctuated only by an occasional shock, you're not very likely to notice the admittedly subtle difference between the organic and macro dimensional domains. It's not the type of character of the experience that differentiates the human dimension from the macro dimensions, but the quality of the experience, which is dependent upon the quality and intensity of the attention. To be on the safe side, always assume that you are presently in the macro dimensional domains and that your perceptions and assumptions about yourself and your environment, especially if they seem to conform to the standard human to be on the safe side, always assume that you are presently in the macro dimensional domains and that your perceptions and assumptions about yourself and your environment, especially if they seem to conform to the standard human primate worldview, are completely wrong. If you're counting on getting through the macro dimensions without any effort to learn how to deal efficiently with the experience, good luck and we'll see you back here again. Here are a few exercises. Mostly they deal with the things we just can't allow to continue. Mostly they deal with the things that we just can't allow to continue in our deeper selves. If we are to continue on this upward evolutionary spiral, anger, jealousy, hunger, and other masquerades for fear, we can rid ourselves of any such hooks we might have developed in our human experience and involvements with the bodies and other biological forms as well. These hooks can really these hooks can really file us up in the macro dimensions. Two kinds of exercises called meditations deal with the two aspects of this problem. Type 1 meditation is designed to help you discover your essential self, to dig down past all the things you now identify as yourself. And as you keep digging down until you find the self without qualities, this is sometimes called the not that, not that, not that meditation. You should be able to correctly identify the void without qualities, or clear light as your deepest, most real self. Many techniques exist to do this. It's by far the most popular since it goes right out the top. Type 2 meditation deals primarily with phenomena, the rolling thunder, bells, trumpeting, and general to net tetanus, mayhem, which seems to occur only during transitional phases, that is, between stable states when upscaling or downscaling in the course of dimensional voyaging. The lights are bright and dazzling, the radiation most disconcerting to the uninitiated, which is to say, to the inattentive, one who has not cultivated the fine art of intense attention. Several forms of negative reinforcement techniques and programmed responses to various chambers are an excellent safety measure against accidental rebirth. Thanks to the space age technology of reading aloud, we now have the means to metaprogram the essential self against negative rebirth. If you experience the macrodimensional domains as if with familiar relations, friends, or relatives, common symbols of organic life as you know it, then there are going to be form changes, face changes, reality changes, all of which could be transcendental if you're able to go beyond human perceptual expectations. A string of meditations called Type 3 meditations are the performer meditations. In other words, how to do something you wish to do while conflicting realities and distorting phenomena are running on. This type of meditation rightly belongs to the class of phenomenal meditations, but it is not only transcendent, but active. That is to say, some action must necessarily be taken from a standpoint beyond phenomena. These are the cities or labyrinth powers, which you can use to move yourself in the direction you want to go in the labyrinth. Something like swimming underwater. Powers are not magic tricks, however, any more than turning the steering wheel on a car. Closing the womb entrance and choosing a room are certainly in this third category of meditation. If you are curious about how the macro dimensions appear to change and produce phenomena, it is very simple. Think of a rubber ball. On the first bounce, it has a lot of energy, so it bounces high. On the second bounce, it bounces lower. On the next bounce, even lower with less energy, and so on. At the moment of death, the Voyager has most energy, so it bounces all the way up into the clear light. Depending on the amount of energy released at the moment of death, is able to remain in the clear light for longer or lesser periods. You are bouncing around in a spectrum of light which appears different in color and form on each perceptual level. On the top bounce, the Voyager hits the clear light. If the Labyrinth Voyager has separated with a great deal of energy, not fear, anger, or panic. However, the wrong type of energy, meaning nervous energy, then it bounces all the way up to the top of the clear light spectrum. On the next bounce, the Voyager is unable to reach as high, this time extending only until the domain of blue light. Of course, we haven't yet taken a look at the lower end of this. If the Labyrinth Voyager is bouncing up into the light spectrum, then what happened when it bounces down? On the bottom end, the Voyager bounces into temporary oblivion. That's why, unless we are well trained to maintain the thread of consciousness during stage 4 sleep, we will tend to experience periods of blackout inner speed within periods of sudden and extreme exposure to more intense radiation level on the higher end of the light spectrum, which can bring about excruciating consciousness interludes and a desire to sink into infrared levels of reality. So on the bottom end, without the ability to maintain a high degree of intensity of attention and presence through the stage 4 sleep, the Voyager will experience blackout and loss of memory, and must, through these contact readings, be reminded of what's actually happening when the light spectrum is re-entered on the top end of the cycle. The effect is roughly the first bounce enters you into the clear light. Depending upon the amount and quality of work done on maintaining, excuse me, let me grab a sip of water. Okay. So on the first bounce, putting you into the clear light, depending upon the amount and quality of work done on maintaining an intense, special type of attention during the human experience, the penetration of this field would be greater or less. Then the down bounce into the area of oblivion. The down bounce can be viewed as a blackout area. The second bounce enters you into the blue light, and this is still enough energy to escape rebirth and to attain liberation in the clear light. The visible light spectrum and ambient temperature plasma phenomena of the space-time discontinuum is seen from above. The standing wave and interface patterns of the God world seem dull white, slower, as if the light is reflected and broken. The breakup points cause harmonics, following the separation of the whole note tonic. Then the down bounce into oblivion once again. This is called the bottom of the well. The third bounce enters you into the white light. Then the down bounce again, not as deep as the first or the second. Finally, this bouncing up and down averages out. The Voyager is left depleted of energy, forcing one to accept submission to the all absolute electromagnetic energy field of the lower biological dimensions, which could be viewed as having taken rebirth on one of the lower six worlds of existence. The real problem with primate existence is to train not the mind, but the essential self, the Voyager, whose presence and attention survive after all the ordinary forms and manifestations of consciousness have fragmented into their five basic and primate mind, totally unrecognizable components. This is roughly equivalent to a cowboy who has never been exposed to anything but duck art. Excuse me. This is roughly equivalent to a cowboy who has never been exposed to anything but duck art and black velvet bar paintings of nude Mexican women suddenly coming face to face with a signed original Picasso. All the various sights you see during the voyage in the macro dimensions are simply those elements of consciousness displaying themselves one at a time and then emerging. During the first stage of the Labyrinth voyage, you see the elements of consciousness as they exist in reality. They are implaceable and unchanging, yet familiar, so they are called friendly guides. They in fact don't guide you anywhere, but as elements of consciousness, they do point you in the way towards liberation if you know how to follow them. In the second stage, you will see the reflections of the five primal components of consciousness, the left hand of God. These are the not so friendly guides. As these components of consciousness merge, called the play of consciousness, one gets the effects of reality, ego, awareness, and worlds of existence and non existence. As these components begin to merge again, they form interlocking blendings, which can be represented by interlocking fingers of the hands. This hand play is a special macro-dimensional language called mudra. The mudra both determines the new form of consciousness and is determined formed responsibly by it. The specific consciousness which forms as a result of energy loss determines how the world, which objectively never undergoes change, will appear to one in its new plasma matrix. As the components of consciousness reform, one seems to experience rebirth, although in fact it is not re-entry into the world, but a new construct reality which is taking place. Once crystallized, the new form consciousness cannot be altered except by a breakdown process such as voyaging in the macro-dimensional domains of the labyrinth. Sometimes the reformed consciousness is even more securely programmed than the previous one, and the ego is strengthened rather than broken. This continuous process of subjective change is the only change there is. A good scientific notion of subjective consciousness alteration is the I Ching. Another of these living notebooks of plasma configurations is the Kabbalah. The 99 names of God, Mudra, Yantra, primetime programming, and the Lesser Key of Solomon are further examples of change notations in the reality spectrum.